Marty Swope.
Richard Hutchins. Paul Dellapella.
Awesome. Could you guys give us the year and like the origin of Ruin?
Well, there's a half of the band that came from New Jersey in like the mid-'70s, and then the other half sort of came from this side of the river, the western suburbs of Philadelphia, and we all sort of hung out in Philadelphia at the Hot Club, Omnis, and that sort of thing. But Ruin really formed sort of around 1982, and in Center City. And we were kind of more or less a Center City based band. So a strand from Jersey and a strand from, I don't know, you're from like Chestnut Hill or
Westmount area.
Yeah.
And I had met them when they were auditioning a bass player who was a friend of mine in 80 or 81. And the drummer couldn't do the audition. They were coming to where my friend and I jammed, so I played his audition. And so I knew this old Ruin that had Glenn singing, Steve Marasco on bass, this guy JR on drums, and Damon. And like I roadied for them. And when I finally got the call to join, the day I first went to join, Steve quit, and then Glenn already knew Cordy. So
you knew Glenn from Temple University, didn't you?
I knew Glenn from just around. I knew him through Tom, the singer. Who I was in 2 other bands, and Tom was in a different band. But he had grown up in Jersey with Glenn, and then introduced us. And then I became friends with Glenn, and then somehow or other he convinced me to play in his band. And I remember meeting you first time, and we just like picked up instruments and we started playing, and it was like, oh shit, I gotta quit my other 2 bands. This is what I'm gonna do. And then the next order of business was to get Vasco, Tom, to join us. And that took some arm twisting because he was in a very successful band at that point, Sensory Fix. And so we played a show, and that was it. So we were pretty much set from there. That was like 83, late 82, early 83.
Basically
96 and 97, we did 3.
One at the first one was at the Ruba Hall, and then upstairs at Nick's, and then the Trop show.
Yeah. I think our intent was when you're 15 and you go to a concert for the first time or whatever, and you see something that just completely blows you away. Like everyone has that experience, right? And we kind of felt like we wanted that to be the starting point, and I suppose we wanted to do whatever we possibly could to recreate that every time we played. And a lot of that was not about like performing for an audience. It was more like communing with an audience. And a lot of like how the whole format of playing music live is really regulated in a way. Like it's regulated in a way that it's very like cliched and repetitive because it's a business, and so businesses want to repeat things, and we just tried to challenge a lot of that. So that's where all that stuff came from, at least from my point of view.
And all of us have really diverse influences. It wasn't like everyone was really into Boston hardcore. Like people were still into the Stones, Jimi Hendrix, some jazz, some avant-garde stuff, and we also just said no matter what you play, just play it like you mean it, like really play passionately. And even if you screw up, which I was known for, you mean it. That mistake was the mistake I should have made.
Right. Yeah. If we're playing Neil Diamond, we always used to say if we covered Neil Diamond, it would have to be a fucking awesome Neil Diamond.
Gotcha.
I just think Philly is insular as a place back then. I don't know. You guys want to take?
I think it did because people might hear say the Stickmen, and if they're not into that style, they might think that's Philly. Or if they hear Wide Eye or Ruin, or they think, oh, that's all they do. And Philly you had a lot of like more artsy stuff, industrial stuff, hardcore, old school punk. There's a lot of.
That's what made it interesting to be a part of that scene back then, because you go to a Futurama or whatever, and there'd be all these different acts. There'd be like, before I was in Ruin, I saw a show. There was like Ruin and like, the Stickmen and like all these diverse different bands. It wasn't like 4 hardcore bands like up there just doing the same thing. It was, and that's what made it great to be involved with that. So.
And even like after I left Ruin, like Ruin would play with Live Skull from New York, and the totally different scenes in some cities, but in Philly that was the way it was. Like you weren't closed-minded then. I mean things might change, but.
I went to school in Boston in '81, and I know a lot of those guys. And there are some great bands from there, Gang Green being one of them. And Chris is an amazing musician. But a lot of those guys, they had the same sound and they played really well. But it was also like very one-dimensional. It was very hard to sustain. So that kind of, they like went up and then they sort of, there was nothing left after that. And in Philadelphia and New York, you mentioned like I have this theory about this is like all these bands would come over from England, like the punk bands, like Susie the Banshees, Pill, who we opened for, people like that, and Killing Joke, like who were like punk or like sort of evolving, and they would play New York, but they would come to Philly like the night before. They played New York on a Saturday night, but they would want to play a show in North America before they would play in New York to like the big, under the big lights, and so they would come down and they'd play the East Side Club or they'd play somewhere in Philly, and we'd get to see them or we get to open for them, and so we got exposed to a lot more diversity, I suppose, through that than maybe other musicians in other cities. At least what I saw, like in D.C. or Boston or whatever. Boston, those guys would get stuff like that too, but they would get it eventually later on. So we'd get a lot because we were like an hour away from New York, and so all these English bands would come to New York. So there's a lot of English influence here, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Shit.
Well, I was too young.
Again, I think like the local scene, like at the Hot Club anyway, where I used to go as a kid, like I could go there when I was like 15 or 16. Like back then, you can go into clubs and
And you played in Statics.
We played the Hot Club. Yeah, I was in a band when I was like 17. Played the Hot Club, and it was like a lot of national bands. We used to play with Speedies from Brooklyn, New York. We played with the Mutants from San Francisco. There's like lots of different, bands. Dead Kennedys played Omnis to 75 people. I remember that, like in 1980. So you'd see all these national and international bands. There wasn't, and so as a result, like I think a lot of people were really spoiled. There weren't a lot of local bands at that period. It came later. I think like that's when it really came later. I'm kind of hard pressed. I mean, Stickmen were around. They were around like in various forms back then. Bunny Drums were around, but again, these guys were all like sort of more artsy on the artsy side of things, and like real sort of punk rock. You had Pure Hell, but they had moved by then. They were like living in England or New York or somewhere. So there wasn't like a pure punk rock band until maybe Sadistic Exploits, I suppose. That was like the first real kind of like
Decontrol.
band. Yeah, Decontrol came a little later, but Sadistic Exploits, like this is like Ped and those guys.
And
like
they're into making a scene
1979,
happen.
1980. I remember hanging out with Ped then, and like he was like, "No, I'm going to do this like sort of, he'd put together
They
this."
put a record out.
Yeah.
And I remember they wanted to make Philly have a scene, because I remember that used to be the whole complaint, like, oh, Philly's dead, blah, blah, blah. And people were like, well, why not do it yourself? Which, something Glenn told was like, if it really sucks, it's our fault, because we're the bands and we're the audience.
I mean, the first sort of all ages shows, the first one we played was in Bunny Drums' loft in Funk Dungeon on 5th and Columbia in early 83. No, but actually there was like Jeff Jenkins's basement where he had Husker Du. There was all this sort of, and then there was like Love Hall, who was a club, and then it became Love Hall because somehow, it morphed into this more of an all ages scene. And Chuck Meehan was booking a lot of that. He was in Wide Eye, but he was also booking a lot of shows at that point. And so I guess it sort of, it started around then, I think.
And next thing you knew, there were shows all the time, and everyone's joining bands, like 82, 83.
Yeah, that's when it all sort of like,
Boom.
it was like a year or two later than Boston and DC.
And people stopped complaining about the scene all the time.
Yeah.
And the hardcore comp, which sort of solidified that we actually have a lot of bands.
Yeah.
Which comp was this?
Get Off Our Back.
Who put this out?
Red Records guy? That's
Steve Fritz, the late Steve
No,
Fritz. Or no, the other guy.
another fat guy. He put out the
And
first
Speak
rule.
Ill of the Dead.
He put out He-Ho. Well, he pressed it. I don't know if he actually
Oh,
put it
right.
together.
Gino, not Gino.
No, it was,
I don't remember his name.
God, I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
I'm old.
There was really no Philadelphia record label though really
He
pushed
pretty
it.
much Red Records.
Red Records.
Red
he's-
Records,
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
much
the
started.
guy
But it was-
whose name we can't remember.
whose name we can't remember. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a lot.
We blocked it out.
Or band. Were you guys in Spin Magazine?
Yeah, we were
Just
mentioned in it.
We were
yeah.
mentioned, actually in a Leonard Cohen interview, Ruin was
Yeah.
mentioned, yeah.
Because we covered him and Carol sent him the record, and he said we murdered his song, but as it should be murdered, it's a clean killing. So that, of course, is in our press release.
Yeah.
It's a clean killing.
There was a lot of stuff in West Philly. We played a lot in West Philly. Now that I look back, we played. There's this guy Tim Dunn who was a sexton of St. Mary's Church. It's like at 34th and something or other.
That's where you play with Live Skull, right?
Yeah, in '86.
Yeah, and there's a video of that show that's online on
Oh.
the Freedom Has No Bounds website that this guy put up, and Tim and Chuck Meehan, like everything moved out to West Philly because it was just somehow easier. There's an activist scene out there, and so there was Chuck who was booking at Abe's, and then there was
The community center.
there was the CEC Center at Drexel. We played there a lot, and there was and then there was the church, and so those places were kind of like where all the all ages scene went.
Plus all the houses.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
also
basements.
played a lot of
Basements,
clubs.
there was a lot
Yeah,
of shows in
basements.
people's basements
Yeah.
in West Philly at that time.
Yeah.
They like became clubs almost. They would have like
Mm-hmm.
shows every Friday or something.
That was back in the day, like you said last night, it was back in the days you could rehearse in people's apartments. Like,
Yeah.
I rehearsed with these guys the first time in, like, Glenn's old apartment on 22nd Street, like, in the basement, like a normal residential apartment, like, in the basement.
And neighbors go like, okay, we'll be done by 6. Okay.
Yeah. And we're just, like,
Yeah.
like, destroying it. It's like, it must be, like, shaking their furniture, but people put up with that stuff back then. I don't know why. They don't do it now, certainly.
Yeah, it must have been the economy or something.
I don't know. So we...
And then David Wildman put out.
David Wildman put out Fiat Lux, yeah.
Yeah,
which
who was kind of our
Wait,
manager.
that was actually, what was it, Meta, and that was affiliated with Shawnee, right?
Right. It was
Shawnee
Lee Paris
was a
had
distributor.
started the relationship, and then he died. David took it over, and then
Right.
we put out our second record with him. Yeah, but it was more or less DIY. There, it wasn't like having a record label. You know, it was. I mean, they weren't really supporting us in any way. We'd have to go out and tour and do all that stuff.
Bigger.
Yeah, I mean, we played a lot of shows with other bands over the years, but we didn't. We were about to go on tour with the Descendants for like a long chunk of time, and then that's when we split up. It was right before we were about to like make a change and probably move out of Philadelphia to do so. But we were gonna, we were looking at like a 200-day kind of deal, and that's when we were just like, okay, we're not gonna take that next step. We're gonna leave it there. Yeah, it's like being married to 5 people.
Yeah.
For 5 years, and it's just, it wears you down. It wears you down when, especially when the level of, I mean, I have to say, like the level of corruption that you have to deal with every single day, like with promoters, with like just everybody. As soon as anyone's interested in what you're doing, there's like 50 grubby hands, taking your money. I mean, they're like, we had like insane stories. In Baltimore, we'd go down and play a show, in a hall that some kid had.
Yeah.
And this is the best. It's like Dennis McHugh, who you ought to talk to.
Yeah.
Dennis, we brought Dennis down. Like he wanted to come along. He's like, yeah, I've never been to Baltimore or whatever. Like I've never seen a show down there. Let's go down there. So we played. Awesome show. Kids were like going nuts. And then this.
The promoter disappeared, right?
No. He was like, he'd guarantee us like, I don't know, $500 or something. And then we go in the back, and then at the end, like we had headlined, and all these kids had come, and we're like, okay, we're on our way back. Give us our $500. He said, oh, you guys, like, I don't have the money. Like, I don't know what happened. There's like,
Yeah.
there was like 700 kids at this show, right? He's charging like, I don't know, $10 a head or whatever.
We
he
had
was.
to get a van
And so we're sitting there, and Glenn and I are like, we're like tired, we're sweaty, we have a long drive home. We're like, going, what the fuck, man? Like, give us our money. He's like, oh no, I can't. And so Dennis, God love him, takes out he has this old butane lighter, and he takes it out, and he's like flipping lighter fluid around this guy's office, and then he like takes out his matches out of his coat, and he's just like doing this and like tossing them, like waiting for it to happen. And the guy's like looking at him, And Dennis is like, you better fucking pay us, man. I'm going to torch this place. Like, he was like looking at, like, straight in his eye. And like, Glenn and I are like, blah, 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 getting nowhere. And Dennis is just like, you know, the threat of arson. And all of a sudden, this guy magically coughs up from his, like, coke-riddled, you know, whatever it was, which really was what was going on. You know, he coughs up $500 and we're happy and we leave. You know, but this is the kind of shit you have to put up with every single day, every single show. There's, like, places that want, you know, they just want to take, whatever, and we just got tired of it.
And that's what they call a guarantee was, you know, a hope for them. Like, I remember, like, we had like a $50 guarantee, like on some little place on South Street, and the place, it wasn't empty. It was,
Yeah.
I was like, no, I really can't, you know, maybe I can give you 25. Like, what are you talking about, you know?
Yeah.
I used to hate that.
I know. So it's like you get that enough times, and it's just, you know, it's done. It's
called
done.
a guarantee for
Yeah.
WKDU, WXPN.
Yeah, that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, we didn't have an internet, so that's where you got information a lot of times.
Yeah, there were certain DJs that really championed the scene back then. That, you know, Eddie Hacksaw being one of them, and then Michelle Polisi being another one.
And again, these guys had like broader visions that, you know, Lee Paris. They had broader visions than like a simple, like, kind of hardcore formula. And I think that's what we drew a lot from that. And I think there was a lot in. If there was one thing about Philadelphia, there was a sort of respected difference among bands. Like, I'm friends with like Jim from FOD and Rich from Electric Love Muffin and Chuck from Wide Eye. I grew up with Chuck practically like a couple miles from here. Known him since 6th grade, and I love Wide Eye, I love FOD, I love Electric Love Muffin. I could never be in those bands. I could never play in them. Nor would they. And I think they like Ruin. They would never be in Ruin. But it was kind of like we were different. We did our own thing. There was we were never like, I don't think, in many ways, kind of in the scene. We were outside of it, but we played in it. And I think that's really important, because had we gotten like totally into the scene and like gone and seen all these shows and been there, like when, you know, when Ian MacKaye got run over by a car or all that kind of stuff, then I think I somehow think that we would have lost our perspective in a way, because we always were outside. We're coming from a different place, and I think that it's this respect of difference that somehow made it work, because having been in Boston and like everybody's straight edge, and if you're not straight edge, you're a Puritan, you're thrown off the ship, you know, kind of thing. Like, I mean, I remember blowing a bone with Springer of Decontrol with HR, the Bad Brains, in the van, you know, and Springer's like, I can't let anyone see me do this shit, you know, because it's like they are Puritans, that, you know, like, and it's funny because here it's more like you're Quakers, you're tolerant, you know, everybody is like different, and everyone can kind of pursue their own, you know, their own weird vision. And that's what, to me, that's what characterized Philadelphia. And that probably, as you say, like, made it more difficult for the outside world to understand, because there wasn't a uniform sound or uniform point of view. But it's also what probably made it unique, or made it more interesting. It certainly made it, I think, for us, it made it more interesting, because we weren't bound by, you know, having to put X's on our wrists and like play a certain speed all the time. You know, we weren't bound by any of that stuff. We never felt black. Yeah, exactly. Wearing white or doing all this shit that we did. We were more equipped to challenge the status quo, and I think that a lot of the bands also in Philadelphia did that in their own way, like in their own, you know. And to me, looking back, that's probably the thing that was probably why we're making this documentary in a way, you know.
Yeah, why it didn't get forgotten.
Yeah.
Very creative place.
Yeah, I actually saw Ruin play before I was in the band, and it was great. It was a Futurama, which was, like we were talking about, one of these sort of eclectic Philly shows where there's all these different kinds of bands playing, and I saw Ruin, and, you know, I had been exposed to hardcore, you know, various other bands. You know, my roommate was into hardcore and he would play a lot of records for me and stuff. But then I saw Ruin, I was like, okay, that's cool. Those guys are, you know, they're not just like a hardcore band. They're doing something different, and they're using hardcore as one of the colors in their palette, basically, you know. And So I thought it was really, really cool the way that Ruin was approaching it, and then I got the opportunity to join the band. I was like, okay, great, you know, so, yeah, it was...
I think it was a slow metamorphosis in the sense that, you know, when I was 14, I went to see the Rolling Stones at like JFK, right? A big arena, you know, 92,000 people or something, right? And, you know, the band's somewhere down there, and you're way up in the stands, and, you know, everyone's like passing around joints and whatever. And then I think like a year later, I was like playing in a band with a friend of mine, and who was a little bit older, and like he took me down to the Hot Club, and I saw the Patti Smith group without Patti, New Year's Eve, 1980. Yeah, it was awesome. And it was Lenny Kaye and all the guys, Ivan Krall, all those guys playing like Who covers, Kinks covers, and it was just like I'm standing there, like, and there are 100 people, and it's just like going off. It's like crazy, and I'm like going, this, like the level of intimacy, because like really back then you had arena rock and all this prog rock shit. So it was like, okay, the experience is much more, it's much more real and immediate, right? And it's not processed and corporate and moneyed, you know, the way arena rock is. And you know, I was like, okay, this is what it's all about. And I was really fortunate that my friend who I was in the band with, like, you know, we wound up at the Hot Club that night of all nights. And so from then on, it was like, okay, yeah, like I want to play in rooms of, you know, intimate rooms of people, like no more than, you know, 1,000 or 1,500. Like, why bother? You know, sure, if we get really big and we play at a big hall, and we've done that before, but it was kind of like there's always something nice about the immediacy of it, I think, and it didn't matter that the style of music was different. Like as Paul said, it was like that was just one of the things. You know, there's so much other stuff out there that you can take on board. I mean, I still listen to prog rock. I still like Led Zeppelin or Aerosmith and stuff like that. I hated the audience. I hated all the crap around it, all the corporate bullshit around it. But there's a lot of integrity in some of those songs, and of course, like, why not draw on them as much as I would draw on Minor Threat or anybody else, Black Flag. But it was kind of like the venue in which you play, you know, and being with your friends and being with people you know, and like communing together is like, that's kind of like where all the power comes from.
Yeah, the power is definitely in the live experience for you know, for that kind of music, because there really was nothing else at the time that I can remember that you know, whereas that energy, that live energy in a small space like you're talking about, where everybody's just sweaty, there's bodies flying around, it's just, you know, it's like it's addicting, you know, it's like it's such a high, you know, to be part of a show like that.
Yeah, and the local like traditional rock scene seemed more like trying to be a mini version of the big arena rock stuff. Like the band was the band, and you go to the concert.
Right.
Whereas punk was like.
It was it was all the audience and the
there was a whole breakdown between audience and performer. There was no there was no more like sort of audience and performer. That was the interesting thing.
Audience would sing the songs, you know, singers would give them the mic.
That's why we're like giving out sparklers and shit like that. You know, it was like to basically just bring all of us together in one community in a way, like in that moment. Yeah.
You didn't need to get some big record company to discover you at JC Dobb.
Yeah.
You would just do it yourself.
Yeah, Abe's. I don't know. I wanted to mention, you were talking about clubs. Abe's Steakhouse.
Yeah.
That was like some of the best shows. I mean, it was like just a back room behind some, like, you know, cheesesteak place.
Yeah.
And it was just like, you know, it was. I remember that the walls would be like dripping. You know, like the sweat would be like dripping down the walls. It was just. But it was that feeling where, you know, the audience and the band were one. It was just, you know, this experience, shared experience.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
Huh?
Wide-Eye.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, Chuck, Howard, those guys, you know, they walk the walk.
What was the story of somebody swinging a hi-hat stand at a show sometime?
No, when they went metal, people used to. Old crowd used to harass them, and at one point, I guess was it
that
Neil?
was later on. Yeah,
he swung a mic stand and hit someone in the head.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he was like, I guess the original audience or whatever really didn't appreciate their change. I stayed out of the politics of it, but
right.
I liked them whatever they did. I mean, I just like, you know, they were like really, you know, they got into the nasty, like really, you know, darker side of stuff. They did it with integrity, and you know, I mean,
They were hard.
Yeah, they were. They were great. I loved going to see them. Yeah.
McGrath.
I was friends with those guys actually, like Zeke and.
I remember in the early days, it was like really like here another example of a band bringing a whole different thing into it.
Yeah.
Like you had some people doing reggae or whatever, but it wasn't like Bad Brains. It was
Yeah.
they had this more upbeat kind of
Yeah, I
thing
like those
going.
guys.
More
They were very
ska,
sunny,
ska
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, they were.
They
Yeah.
were young and they're also very, very like energetic kind of.
Yeah. So you can see already you like you go Wide Eye and then you go McGrath. Like you can see
Totally
really different sides of the coin. Yeah.
And they had the skateboarding thing going for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Statistic behavior.
I only saw them a couple times.
I barely remember them.
Yeah, they were on the comp.
Yeah.
In fact,
I
every
barely
band you've
remember
mentioned so
seeing
far has
them.
been on the
Yeah,
comp.
yeah.
Do you have the comp compilation? Oh, it's everybody. They were
Stick-
cool. They were-
Stickman.
We played their final show in Baltimore when they broke up. We watched them break up in front of us, and it was not pretty.
We did a second set.
Could you
We
please,
did the second
please
set,
please
yeah.
give me that story of
Yeah.
what happened?
Well, I think there was just a lot of tension. They had a lot of tension about something. I'm not sure what it was, but I remember Pete and Beth were having this like, like something was unresolved, and they were having this argument, and we played the first set, and then they were having this argument, and then and they just said, no, fuck it, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of here. And so like they walked out, and it was like, we thought, okay, this is going to be, you know, a kiss and make up, but it wasn't. And so we had to go on and play the second set. Yeah, we played the second set, and we and so it was just us. And so they're like, oh man, so sorry. And then Pete always had this thing. He was like, he would always come to me in his way, like, Cordy man, you know, I love this like the shit you do. It's like you know, it's this total jive like speed freak thing going on. It's like the George Harrison thing, you know, like that spiritual shit you guys do is like, it's like very George Harrison, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? This George Harrison shit, you know? And I'm like, yeah, thanks, Pete. That.
That really nails it on the head.
Yeah. But he always talked like that. Like it took him forever to actually say what he was going to say because he was like he talked like he sang in a way. But it was very funky always. But yeah, those guys, that was their demise. It was like, I don't know, 84, must have been. Were you there? You were there. Yeah, so it must have been 84-ish, 83, 84-ish in Baltimore.
FOD.
Yeah, Jim and Dave,
Oh.
good guys, great band, a lot of fun, a lot of like just really good. They're really, I mean, they've been at it for a long time, but I mean, back then they were just a lot of fun.
I played with Jim for a little while.
Did you?
Yeah, he filled in Little Gentleman.
Oh, all right.
And then when I was my first West Coast tour, they were out there at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So they pulled up in this van and they're all piling out. I'm like, hey,
They,
people.
Was that with Live Skull?
Yeah.
I remember Jim, we opened for the Dickies at East Side Club, and Jim was like, guys, can I be your roadie? I like adore the Dickies. And so like we're like, yeah, sure. So he like came and like he was like carrying an amp, but he was like looking at the Dickies. And so like we yeah, that sounds a little weird, doesn't it? But you know, they played like, you know, Banana Split song, Stuck in a Pagoda with Trisha Toyota, all that stuff. Like, and he was like there, and it was awesome. And I think it was like he had just formed FOD. I think they were like brand new. But I remember that show was pretty funny. That was a great show, actually. They were amazing.